Hello, everybody. It's Tara Boothby and David Hayward, the Naked Pastor, and we are going to talk about inclusive love and grief and loss. And so, maybe to get started, David, maybe you could just connect with us about what's been going on with your own personal life a little bit, and your where you're at with your understanding or experiencing of grief.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your show again, Tara. It's good to be here, and hi everybody out there. Yeah, what's going on? Just so much. I mean, things are blowing up in terms of Naked Pastors' reach. I mean, my cartoons are just spreading all over the place, and I guess my thoughts, my videos, people are sharing.
Yeah, it's
And
good
it's just
stuff.
getting Yeah, it's just getting kind of crazy. And, I have people who help me out, but it just doesn't feel like enough. I don't know what I'm going to do. I need to come up with a solution because I'm so busy. I'm enjoying myself, but I'm just so busy all the time. And what I really love to do is create interesting art. Hey, you got my mug.
I do have your
Nice.
mug here. Let's see,
I
can we
love
see?
that one.
Let's There,
Yeah,
this one. If it's gonna
I love
show
that.
right, I'll scroll it.
Yeah,
Left behind.
that's one
There
of
we
my
go.
favorite.
Me too. It's so meaningful to me.
Well, I mean, when I was a teenager, we were spoon-fed that Left Behind stuff. It was terrifying.
It was terrifying, and it fits too. So I mean, I adore your art. I adore everything you do, and your voice is so important, and your transparency, your humanity, and your I guess your influence, like how you are supporting people to spiritualize inclusive love and
Uh-huh.
figure out what that means, right? So, and how you hold it gingerly and firmly at the same time, with respect for diversity, all the things, right? Equity, all the things.
Yeah.
And so, Left Behind is an interesting mark because there's this old Christianese thing that we've experienced of like, be afraid of death and dying and ending, but don't have any fear at all. And then there's this piece of just sort of looking at grief and life and love. Um, and I don't know, where are your thoughts at with that these days? Just grief and life and love.
Well, it's pretty fresh for me. I just lost my mom in December.
Yeah.
And we're in uh April right now. And it's still very, very fresh. I still am, want to pick up the phone and call her every day. So that's just been a very fresh kind of
Yeah.
grief for me. Of course, there's all kinds of different grief. There's my dad has dementia and Parkinson's. He's in a nursing home. He's alive, but there's just no sense of connection. And that's a different kind of grief, very complicated.
Totally.
And then, with the death of my mom, who was the matriarch of the family, my dad, being put in a long-term care facility, he was the patriarch. My mom was the matriarch. So the patriarch was gone, the matriarch was gone. And then the four remaining kids, we had another brother who took his own life back in 2016. But we it's sort of exploded, and so things aren't the same with our family. So it's a lot of grief right now about family of origin, birth family and all that kind of thing. So it's yeah, it's one of those things where you just have to embrace the grief and try to figure out ways to move on.
Yeah.
My mom and I were pretty close, and my dad and I not so much. But well, I'm getting to the age now where loss is becoming more frequent, and the fear of loss too, because people are getting older and some people are getting sick, and all this kind of thing. So it's a interesting journey we're on for sure.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. Um, and the nuances, grief is, well, facing our deteriorating body, or how I've been saying it to my children, is that people's bodies get tired. And as our body gets more and more tired, that exhaustion looks different. And dementia is, that's such a hard one. It's
Yeah.
so different.
Yeah.
Um, but then they're all death, maybe the pace and the experience of life losing this fleshy life, this human life being lost is always unique. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So I lost my brother. He was next to me. I was the oldest, and
Mm,
I'm the oldest of five kids. And then my brother Mark took his life and lost him. And then my dad started showing signs of dementia and Parkinson's. And then my mom suddenly died. It was
yeah,
kind of a surprise this last year.
it was really, really quick. Hey,
Yeah. And then, the siblings remaining, it was sort of like a bomb went off in the middle of us. And it's just really hard to recover from that. And
it
I'm
is.
I'm getting to the age now too where I'm healthy. Lisa and I, my wife and I, we strive to be healthy and we want to live long and prosper. But um, you know, we're getting to that age now where we're seeing other family and people we know getting sick and passing away. So it's an interesting season to say the least.
It is, and then it is just inevitable. So
Uh-huh.
I wanted to catch something here because you mentioned your brother took his life. And it's such an important part of grief to honor. And what I will say is that death is never selfish.
Hmm.
And there's this false belief about um, people who are so riddled with mental illness, or potentially, I don't know your brother's story, addiction, whatever the culprit is.
Hmm.
It's not rooted in a source of selfishness when people um, unfortunately take their own lives.
Hmm. Yeah, it was a surprise, and then on the other hand, I I kind of understand why he did what he did. So it's devastating. And he was kind of the black sheep of the family, not kind of, he was the black sheep of the family, except him and we got along. Um, and so I was the last one to spend time with him and
Yeah,
talk with him and everything. And then it was me the police called.
yeah,
Because I was the last person he had been talking to on his cell phone. And I was the one informed, even though we're 1,000 miles away. So and all the other siblings were there. So it was, it's yeah, those kinds of things are devastating for sure.
devastating.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then I get, because and there you go, the black sheep of your family. That's interesting, because you're a rebel, right? So he must have been a good time, I'm guessing.
A good kind?
Good time.
Oh, yeah, no, good time. See, I'm the oldest,
Yeah.
and I was we all have different ways of coping with being at home. And, I grew up in a home where the father was the patriarch
Mhm.
and ruled with an iron fist. And my way of coping was to uh, um, cooperate and not challenge or anything. My brother, Mark, who took his life, His was the opposite. He wasn't going to put up with it. Confrontational fights. Um, and so him and my dad were like that. And he left home when he was 16, never to
Wow.
return. And whereas I stayed home until I was 18, very obedient, compliant. And then when I left home, I never went back, you know. And then the other siblings had their own ways trying to figure out how to cope, you know. So yeah, it's everybody figures out how to live their lives, right? And mine
Yeah.
was to not cause a stir and to just survive and get out of there alive kind of thing. So
Yeah.
uh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. And it's so, you know what, it's so natural when we're talking about grief and love that we notice our families and like our orientation or like how our attachment system responded. And when you say it that way, like what I'll say about myself is my sort of coping stances in my family was always like, know your limits, stay within them. And there's some of us who get that philosophy and we're like, okay, just stay within the limits. And then there's some of us who are like, I gotta just like
Yeah,
go outside, color outside the lines sort of
yeah,
thing. And
yeah.
yeah, so much love and complexity, right? So love is complex, grief is complex, and then we have our like our blood family.
Hmm.
And that's strange, you know, especially when we're thinking about loss. And inclusive love is so much about loss.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
so what for you, like you're sort of like this love expert. What do
Oh,
you
yeah.
think? Don't you think? Of course you are. You're such a love expert. What do you like how are you wrestling with love during your this time of losing your mom?
So for for me, I remember when I had become ordained, I was in the ministry and everything, and I lived in the country. I had three small country churches under my care. I was a Presbyterian minister at the time in Canada and where I am now. And I remember diving deep into like mysticism, prayer, meditation, contemplation, and I I've finally came to a deeper understanding of what love was. And so, you think of the words of Jesus, for example, who said, justice and mercy is like rain, it rains on everyone, or like the sun, it shines on everyone. Or it's like, he didn't say this, but like it's like gravity, nobody's exempt from gravity. Um, and it's that kind of deeper understanding of what love is. It's not, there are levels and different kinds of expressions of that love. Like, for example, Lisa and I, my wife and I, we have a romantic love we share that nobody else gets. So it's very
Yes.
focused on one another. But when we're talking about love in general, it's all inclusive. It has to be. And I came to that deeper understanding when I was a Presbyterian minister out in a country charge, with three churches, that this love is all inclusive. It's everyone's included. And so that's what really began my journey to where I am now. It began back then in the woods when I was meditating, on love. And that realization of what love is dawned on me. And to the point where many years later, as a pastor, I realized that, and this is a little bit of a confession, but I realized that a lot of churches don't like that kind of all-inclusive kind of love. The church really, and church people, that my experience and observation is they want to be considered special and inside and in the group, you know, and the ones that have passed the test. And there is some level of that where there's, these special communities and so on, but that doesn't mean you're any more loving or less loving. And to me, that kind of um, all-inclusive love is where it all began for me, and
Mhm.
eventually led to me. Like I was in the ministry as a pastor for 30 years, and that's what eventually caused me to leave the ministry, which was how many years ago? 14 years ago. Was because I felt love was for more than just Christians or people in the church. So that it's universal.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that's important when we're talking about grief. And so you're like inclusive love, there's this your belief um is that this profound spiritual lens that extends beyond life. Like we're included in, like, I mean, this is right on what I believe as well from my book that I just put out, is this like we're all floating in this giant massive watery love,
Hmm.
and we all are. And so then there's this thing about death, or what we perceive as death, because we can only perceive it with our human understanding,
Right.
and which is scary.
Hmm.
And we don't want to think more about it because we're afraid. Maybe I think I'm saying we, um but I mean, I don't really feel that afraid. So I wonder, I think I theorize that other people are afraid to think about death because there's an uncertainty that love is there,
Uh-huh.
if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know about you, but the kind of Christianity I found myself around most of the time was uh, quite condemnatory. Like there was a lot of judgment and needing to measure up. And so one was never certain if you were in or out, you know.
Yes.
And so that creates a lot of insecurity
Hmm.
and fear about, um, are you deserving, or are you loved, or, you know, are you cared for? And that's, to me, that's not love, you know. I mean, you somebody can love, say, spaghetti to the exclusion of all other food, but when someone loves food, they love food in general. So like for me, and appreciate it, they might not want it or even like it, but there's a love, a kind of a universal love there. And so when I came to that understanding of that universal love, that all is embraced in love, it changed everything for me.
Yeah.
It doesn't negate um, the particular. You need particularity in the universal, like universal love, but it needs particularity. It needs expression. And love needs to be applied to this person. We can believe in universal love, but unless we can apply it and employ it uh, with each and every person, then I think we need to go deeper. So for me, that sort of insight that this universal love, and that love is love, and love is all, and love means all, and that sort of changed everything for me, because being a Christian minister, um, it's sort of an underlying assumption that we're the ones who've got it right, and that we're the ones who God loves, especially. And, so we see that in all kinds of religions and all kinds of denominations, where um, they feel that they've got it right more than somebody else, and therefore they're more loved, you know. And so when that kind of universal love became clear to me, it upset a lot of things in my life, to the point where eventually I left the ministry in 2010 to continue what I'm doing online.
Yeah, because there is no hierarchy of love, and that is what causes pain. When you talk about your family of origin, or my own experience in my family of origin, or in community, is when my humanity feels it is categorized by a hierarchy of how
Right.
lovable I am. And I feel out, then I'm isolated.
Hmm.
And part of your big uh beautiful message is that we're all included. LGBTQ plus have a place of inclusion, and their pain matters. If the church has caused them pain, or if they want to be a part of a spiritual identity, there's an inclusiveness without hierarchy.
Right.
And marginalized people have experienced more of that hierarchical love than some others. There's people who have experienced way more hierarchical love than I have.
Hmm.
And so the drip in the bucket of my pain, and pain's subjective, but it hurts. There's people who have just been crushed by lovelessness,
Hmm.
human lovelessness.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And that's grief too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, um, I remember a story I was told a long time ago where I think a mom was tucking in her child, and um, the child was scared, stark, going to sleep, and the child wanted their mom to hug them and just keep hugging them because they were scared. And then the mom said, "Well, God's here, God's with you, and God will hug you when I leave the room." And the kid said something like, "Yeah, but I want a God with skin on."
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes.
and it's that kind of, you know, um, it's not enough. There's many people who are told God loves them, but nobody in the flesh loves them. And so how do you know what love is? How can you experience love? And so that to me is why it's very important when we talk about mystical,
Mm-hmm.
universal love or whatever, it actually needs to have skin on.
Yeah.
It needs skin on. And we need to be showing this universal love. And I try to do that. So, and it's almost like it needs to be almost automatic
Right.
when you reach that level of love, of universal love, choice is gone. It's just universal love, and choosing one over the other, or favoritism, or
Yeah.
any of that kind of thing doesn't make sense in that kind of understanding of what love is, that universal kind of love.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And that flesh and bones, to feel love in our bones, in the very fiber of our being. I think a lot too about hugging, and we're
Yeah.
like a touch starved people, and yet we are touch adverse. There's all these rules, and especially in my field, I just privy to conversation last week about hugging, and people are like, oh, I don't know, that's not really appropriate. And I'm like, but with consent, and with service to other people, whenever I do something, love is not about me. Love is not me getting something from you. Self-giving, other focused love. There's this piece of like, we need to find our way back to the flesh and bone of it all, to the hugging of it all. Because like, how much do you need a hug over the past 6 months or whatever it is, as you're in the newness of grief and loss, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But man, COVID really threw a wrench in that one, didn't it?
COVID made what was terrible worse.
Yeah.
It's
It's
just,
like even shaking hands now. Some people, So the human touch thing is even less than what it was, So yeah.
Yeah. And I think grieving people need touch. But I mean, obviously with consent first, because we're all leery,
Yes.
we're all more afraid. We've all been traumatized recently, and then most people have more trauma,
Uh-huh.
whether that's North American trauma or people who have actually experienced war and other terrible things as well. Um, but without flesh, people who show spiritual love,
Yeah.
our isolation is just that much more isolated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's you know, that's one of the things that I really had to deal with after I left the ministry and the church, um, was figuring out ways to be around people, you know. Um, so I ended up teaching English as a second language at a local university here
Yeah.
to international students. And, you know, uh, that was very, very different than ministry, that's for sure. But now I've been working on, doing Naked Pastor full time and art and everything. It's like I'm alone. I pretty much live the life of a hermit because my wife's a full-time hospice nurse.
Yeah.
And when she's working, I'm here all by myself and just working away, or doing art or whatever. And it's like that loss of community and that loss of physical touch and proximity to other people and everything is, man, that's like so long ago. So it's quite bizarre. But like Lisa and I have learned, one of the big lessons we learned after leaving the church, and then, you know, since COVID, is that it's up to us to form and nurture relationships and friendships.
Yeah.
Um, we we just That's something we really, really have to work hard on. And that whole thing about being with other people and
Yeah.
staying in community. I think, to be honest, that's the church's number one asset, is being able to provide community on a platter. Like as soon as you start at a church, there you go. You've got a whole community, and that's one of its, you know, strong points for sure.
It can be. I mean, that's never been my experience, but
No,
it
I'm not
should
saying,
be.
yeah, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm
Yeah.
just saying you're around other people.
Yeah. Proximity. There's proximity of people. There's hope for community, I think. Um, but it's so we're so broken. And the spiritual view of love is so fractured that even people who claim to be wise or educated on spiritual things, religious things, the wounded view of love, it's just like
Hmm.
we're so prone to condemnation
Yeah.
and we're so in love with condemning. And um, there's this YouTube, it's a Conan O'Brien, Louis C.K. hates cell phones. And Louis C.K. he's genius. He got into some trouble a few years ago. He's a little touchy-feely or whatever he was, showing his parts to people. But he shares this story of one of the parts is how mean people can be, but it feels good. Like, oh, it gets in your belly, warm
Yeah.
in your belly, but that's not loving.
Yeah.
And then it's hard. How do we trust that somebody will come alongside of us in our need, in the grief and loss
Yeah.
or the pain? Um, and then I was going to ask you these two questions, but I want to sort of put them out there and answer them and then see what you say, because I was wondering, like this, how should we live and how should we die? But I think what I'm hearing, and you can unpack it more, is that we should live with love, and we should, if we are so blessed to know when we're dying, we should aim to die with love.
What do you mean die with love? Die
but
loving other people.
die loving other people, live well and living well and dying well.
Mm,
There's this piece about love.
yeah.
What are we holding on to in life, and what are we holding on to when we see the end of our humanness, I
Hmm.
guess.
Hmm.
No matter what people believe about spiritual things or afterlife, we know that there's an end to our humanness.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. That's one of the things that like Lisa and I determined when our kids were quite young and they were starting to get to the point where they were expressing their independence and individuality. We actually had to sit down and make a conscious decision. Are we going to impose upon them what we think is the way they should be, or are we going to allow them to be who they are and go with it, see what happens? And we chose the latter one. Now we're surrounded by people who um, are trying to push their kids in a certain direction and to fit a certain mold and fulfill all the hopes and dreams and desires and expectations of the parents, right? But our decision was to just love our kids for who they were, provide a safe space for them to grow and discover themselves. And man, it was messy. It was messy and scary. But now they're all in their 30s, our kids, and we all have a great relationship with one another. And we're all honest with one another, and we'll go on vacations together and laugh together. In fact, later today, we're all going to hop on and FaceTime and chat, and we're spread all over the place. But that's, I think, what love is. Love is about freedom and diversity, not control and uniformity.
Right.
And that's the problem with, in my opinion, the church, because it expects uniformity and sameness and and instead of the diversity that I think love encourages. So I think that for me that's what it's all about, is providing that is I think love provides that open space,
Yeah.
for
I
people to
love
be.
that. Mhm. Within love, that unity and diversity. And when I'm listening to you, David, it just makes sense. Like in our brain, we'll say sometimes we call it like a trauma container, or there's these trauma channels. And so when we're talking about grief, it's just so natural that you and I, our brains are bringing up parts of grief.
Yes.
And the church, for you and I both, there's grief there of
Yeah.
loss of our spiritual family, or changing in dynamics of our spiritual family, however that is. But
Yes.
when in grief, and I've never thought about it this way, but it's brilliant that you've said this, is when we're grieving, we're seeking what is love and grief. And so part of our healing is to touch those spots in our story where unity and diversity, where holding both unity and diversity has not happened. And then part of grieving is to reconcile that. So inclusive love and grief
Hmm.
is about, there's an element of it that is just about hearing our own story of when unity and diversity was not held together.
Because what I mean, the kind of culture I was raised in was unity was only possible if we were uniform
Yeah.
and homogenous, a blend, um, rather than diversity.
Yeah.
And but the thing about what I've learned is people long to be themselves
Yeah.
and to be their unique selves. And the fun is, and the challenge, but the the fun challenge is figuring out how unity works with that diversity. That's the fun part. And that's the challenge. That's what life is. So like Lisa and I think it makes for richer relationships. For example, Lisa and I, when we know we each have the freedom to be unique, our unique selves, we feel the freedom to explore that and to figure out what that means and to live that with the assurance that love holds it together, holds
Yeah.
us, and that love does not require uniformity or sameness. In
No.
fact, love thrives in like diversity. And so that's why I I think that's why love is so controversial, really, deep down, is because it loves diversity. And the kind of love some religions talk about isn't diversity at all. They want everybody to come and join the club and look the same. And that's not love. Love just is and loves the diversity
Yeah.
and encourages it and nurtures it. And the fun is figuring out um how do we make this work?
Yeah. That's beautiful. And that, I mean, requiring sameness is always disorganizing. It's unnatural and it polarizes. And so that's actually anti-love.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's when you're talking about love too, and I've been thinking about this because one existential theorist will talk about how we make ripples in our life, but that this person doesn't believe there's anything afterwards. So I'm like, well, where do you throw your pebble if you're only sending ripples backwards? So that alludes to like throwing a pebble into the side of a pool, whereas like, why wouldn't you throw your pebble into the ocean and then have these full ripples?
Mhm.
But love radiates. So when love goes out and out, it goes.
Right.
So it causes, when we're really saying how much space can love hold for diversity, it starts to lean us into this spiritual dilemma that their love does this thing that's way, way more than just what my human heart and my human capacity can do. And then what does that mean?
Yeah. So I sort of picture this wheel with spokes. Um, and can I share this image with you?
100%. Please do.
So I sort of see this image of a like a bicycle wheel, let's say, with spokes going out. And each of these spokes is like a religion or a denomination or something like that. I don't know what that is. You can Did you hear that?
A little bit, but noise happens.
Okay, okay. Um excuse me. So each of these spokes that come out from the center, the further out they go, the more um unique they become. Like they're the more divisive they become. The more separate they come, right? Because the further towards the outside of the wheel, the wider the spokes are, right? And then they come together in the center. So like all these denominations and religions and philosophies and all that, at the outside of the wheel, they're far apart. And distinctives, all their distinctives, right? And separate. But when they get closer to the center, they get closer together and until the point they're all touching at the hub of the wheel. And that hub of the wheel is what fascinates me.
Mm.
That where there's that togetherness. And when you think about like quantum physics and mysticism, Christian mysticism, Zen Buddhism, Hinduism, philosophy, you know, different these different thought and so on that are they start sounding the same the closer they are to this center. They're all touching each other. And there's similar language being used, although there's some distinctives and everything.
Yeah.
That's what fascinates me. So all these religions and thoughts and denominations and all these ideas and everything, philosophies, the further distinctive they become, the further apart they become. Okay, that's fine. But when they start, when they get closer to the center, they start sounding the same,
Mhm.
similar anyway, even using similar words. And they have the same kind of open feel.
Mhm.
So I'm talking about like mysticism and Zen Buddhism and
Yeah.
Buddhism, Hindu philosophy and
Muslim,
Muslim, yeah,
Christian,
Christian philosophy,
mhm.
even atheist ideas,
Existentialism, even
essentially
though
all
lots of them,
these.
the originals were atheists, there's like this, there's a lot of this sort of like similarity.
One of the most spiritual books I ever read is Seven Brief Lessons. Oh, what's it called? Seven Brief. Carlo Rovelli is the author. Seven Brief Lessons in Physics, I think.
Mm,
He's an atheist, but it's one of the most spiritual books I've ever read because it sounds similar to what, all these other schools of thought are talking about. So that's
yeah,
what's fascinating to me is what's happening here in the hub, rather than, all these distinctives that separate.
yeah,
These are these are valid and maybe even necessary because we wouldn't have the wheel without them.
yeah.
But they all join together in this sort of a mystical union, I might say,
Hmm.
is fascinating to me. That's what's fascinating to me.
Well, and I love, and may we all be fascinated by that togetherness. And that is, how do we live and how do we, when we know we're dying,
Mhm.
if I'm dying, or if I'm coming alongside of somebody who's dying, if I can hold on to some part of me still has an anchoring or a noticing of being fascinated by that togetherness,
Yeah.
that inclusive love. And that's scary for people, especially when we've been raised to polarize and view I have to be right, and that means you have to be wrong.
Hmm.
But right, believing in right and wrong is violence, actually.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I'm a cartoonist, as you know, but maybe some of your listeners don't know, but I'm fascinated by really good cartoons. There's cartoons where there's these two armies facing one another, like knights with armor on horses and everything, and each one is carrying a banner. So there's two banners, and they the on the banner of one army it looks like a rabbit symbol. And the other banner, it's the same symbol, but upside down. It looks like a duck. But they think they're on opposite sides. They think they're enemies. But it's the same image. One's just upside down.
Yeah,
That to me is a very, very, very clever cartoon. I love a good cartoon.
yeah,
And um, and that's a very clever cartoon. And I think, you know, our distinctives as philosophies and religions and ideas and thoughts and all these things, the further distinctive we become, the further apart we become, and the further separated we become and divided. But the more we realize we're kind of speaking the same language and using the same symbols and playing around with the same ideas, that's where the unity is. And that's where we start realizing that it's almost impossible to be dogmatic
yeah.
on a certain religion or a scientific view or whatever. Everything's, you know, um, oh, what's the scientific term um, when something can be proven wrong? Uh, that's
Like, hy-
no,
hypothesis or
I was going to say implausible, but it sounds
mm,
something like that, where that's a basic rule of science that when you make a statement, you understand it can be proven false. It's falsifiable.
yeah,
And so everything is tentative. All these claims, all these scientific claims, theological claims, philosophical claims, atheist claims, we all have to understand that it's falsifiable. and therefore we say it tentatively, right? So that, I think that's a very intelligent and smart approach to life.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this, oh wow, David, this is just so, so rich. Um, and I think too, you're alluding to this. So what, just with fear, whether we fear death or we fear somebody dying or somebody has died and we're afraid now, or we're afraid of the rapture or not afraid of the rapture, or we're afraid of just I mean, Christians, I was raised to be afraid of fear. That's how I was raised. We weren't supposed to be afraid. I remember when my grandpa passed away and I spoke to him on the phone and he said to me, I'm afraid. And I said, that's okay. It's normal to be afraid. And I shared that with a family member afterwards and they were livid. He was not afraid. There's no way he was afraid. But if we're in the fullness of our humanity, we're going to be afraid, and yet we're still included in the same heart of love as everybody else. Within that heart of love, there is
Right.
nurturing and care for the wounded and the brokenhearted,
Yeah.
and the sorrow,
Yeah.
the 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 false idea of weeping and gnashing of teeth. That is not an image of fear and sadness. Gnashing teeth is not fear. That is anger or something else. And there's still a place for anger and love. Like there's all the things are included. Um, sorry, I went on a tangent. But within, I guess, what do we say to somebody who is afraid? What do you say to somebody who is afraid? Just in general, or afraid of life, or afraid of being wrong now that they're starting to challenge how to bring love more into their lives.
Yes, I always try to just open things up, like that there's nothing to fear. Like what are we afraid of, and expose the light on that, you know?
Mhm.
It's like I was fortunate to be able to spend the day with my mom just before she died. And you know, she was peaceful, and she had her own theology going, you know, which is probably different than mine and different than other people's, but it worked for her. And, you know, I don't judge that. It,
Yeah.
it I don't judge that. You know, I might not believe the same thing she does, but I don't judge it, like, because she's neither right nor wrong. Like that to me doesn't matter. We all have our coping mechanisms, right? Nobody believes what they don't want to believe. Everybody
Mhm.
believes what they want to believe. It's
Yeah.
volitional. And so my mom believed what she believed because it worked for her. And I believe what I believe because it works for me. And but I know that it's not necessarily true. It's just what's working for me right now.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of courage to say because we we don't get to have it completely true and completely right.
Yeah.
And that is really goes against the grain
Yeah.
of our society and our religion says have the truth
Yeah.
and know it 100%. And we're people. We don't get to know it 100%.
No, and the freedom comes when you realize it, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. It
Yeah,
doesn't,
it does.
the way
It
you believe isn't going to make a difference. You know, it's like I did this cartoon. I've seen this in real life actually, where a guy's on his deathbed and dying, and the pastor's there, and the guy who's dying, his whole family's there, and the pastor says, leading the person who's dying to the Lord, and he's saying, "Repeat after me, dear Lord, I confess I am a sinner. I confess I am a sinner. Please forgive my sin. Please forget." And he dies, and the pastor says, "Oh shoot, too late. He didn't make it." But there's people who believe that.
yeah, there are.
That he didn't say it, even though he intended it.
I call
And
that crystal
like
ball
magical.
Jesus or magic Jesus.
Yes, yes. So, you know, Um, I used to be there when I was younger. I don't judge myself for it because it worked for me at the time.
Mhm.
And the way I believe now or think now, it works for me now. And I think it's important that we know that about ourselves, that we are, and I think it's important for us to know that about our
Yeah.
mind,
Yeah.
that we're employing them to work for us and
Yeah.
make sense of the universe and make us less scared and safe, you know?
And
All the,
it's so when we think of all those feelings and all our experience, so what I believed 10 years ago and 20 years ago and 30 years ago and so on, and what I believe now, and what I rejected emotionally 10 years ago, 20 years, 30 years ago, and what I wrestle with emotionally now and what I accept. All of those things are included in inclusive love. And
yeah,
we and it's included in inclusive love. We don't get to have the truth 100%. We are in our human experience, and all we can do is love ourselves as our neighbor.
hmm, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
um and then I want to share this little story with you. I was at my a beautiful teacher passed away at my children's school, and so I've been talking with my kids a little bit, trying to see where they're at. They're 6 and 7, and I was talking to my son last night. He says these strangely wise things. So we're kind of talking about that, like whatever question comes up. So he says, why do people die? I said, well, people's bodies get tired. Their body gets really tired out, and then the body gives way. But some people believe, and I am right now kind of believing, that actually death is like a birth into whatever is next, this better real life. And he says, oh, I get it. So we're like chickens, and we're all these little chickens in our little eggs. And then one day we break our eggs open, or our eggshell breaks open. And I think no matter what, because afterlife is, we don't have enough information to really make a critical analysis of afterlife. But love is like the eggshell that the chicken is in, for sure. And
yeah,
when we break through that shell and we realize we can be birthed into inclusive love, we don't have to stay stuck in that eggshell. That is a spiritual rebirthing.
yeah,
And then I don't know. I mean, I do think there's something afterwards, but there's a lot of great fiction and some hopefully potential. I don't know if you can call them facts, but we just don't know enough. We don't know enough.
no, we don't. No, we don't.
We don't, and that's
Theories.
okay.
They're all theories or theologies or philosophies
Yeah.
or, whatever. Um, yeah, yeah, we could go way down a rabbit trail there, but yeah,
Yeah.
it is fascinating for sure.
It is fascinating, but may we all be little chickens cracking our eggshells over and over again. And if that's what this life is, then grief or love or loss or anger or persecution,
Hmm.
we just keep cracking forward,
Yeah,
you know.
yep, back and
Yes,
forth.
cracking forward. So we should probably wind things down. Anything you want to say before we say goodbye?
No, good luck with your book though.
Thank
Hope
you.
it does well. Yeah, it was
I
really.
hope so too. Thank you for your endorsement of Love and Love's Energy, and thank you for your friendship. David, you're the real deal, and sounds like you need an intern. So any interns out there, David needs you.
got, I've got, I've got, let me see, one, two, three, four, five, six or so people working on or seven now, or more than that actually, working with me. They're not all full time, but they're all working and helping
Yeah,
Pastor with everything I'm doing. And it's just, yeah, I would love a personal assistant. That would be really awesome.
yeah.
So, yeah.
So we're putting it out there right now. We'll see what happens. So yeah, well, thank you so much, David. And I just appreciate you so much, and seeing you on Instagram, and then every once in a while when we get to chat. And we'll do this again because we do.
Yeah, anytime.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.